Great, thank you, Don, and thanks all for joining us today here in Millbrook. As mentioned, my name is Robichaud, and I coordinate the Mikmaq Forestry Initiative at the Confederacy of Mainland Mikmaq, which is located here in Millbrook and just down the road. So we've been at this initiative for a few years now. The pilot's been signed since 2019, so we're quite young, but getting going. And I gave this presentation a couple weeks ago in one of the webinars, but hopefully, some folks haven't seen it before, and we're able to get more people informed on the work we're doing. So really, the MFI is a province-wide initiative involving all 13 Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq communities to promote Mi'kmaq-led forestry. Really, two of the main pillars of activities that we're at right now are stewarding the lands which are captured under a license agreement with the province, but as well as building capacities with and for communities, whether that's within the forest sector, for the initiative itself, or for community woodlands. The MFI is steered by a body called the Forestry Advisory Committee, and this group is made up of 3 organizations, or staff from 3 organizations, and together they all represent all 13 Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq communities. And I guess what I missed there is this initiative is led by the Assembly, so we're really governed and led by the communities and their governing structures. So the 3 organizations that are involved are the Confederacy of Mainland Mikmaq, representing all 8 mainland communities, the Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources, which works with 5 Unama'ki or Cape Breton communities, and the Mi'kmaq Rights Initiative, which works very closely at a high level with the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs. So the MFI, through its work, is guided by 2 main Mi'kmaq principles. The first is Nadugalink, which describes utilizing what the Creator has provided us, but in a way that doesn't impede on the sovereignty and well-being of those 7 generations down the road. The other term the other principle that we're working through is Edawaptamunk, or two-eyed seeing. And this is a principle which describes utilizing, through one lens or one perspective, Western science and Western ideologies, but on the other utilizing Ilnu or Mi'kmaq perspectives. And together, they come together to provide a much more holistic perspective and way of utilizing the natural world. So, with the MFI being a forestry initiative, I can't stress enough the importance of what the MFI is doing in the context of working to restore and to support the Mi'kmaq forest. Mi'kmaq have been here time immemorial, and since times of settlers coming, the landscape has changed drastically. So the activities and the work that we're doing is working to honor the current, past, and future generations, but doing so in a way that is respectful to Mi'kmaq ideologies and perspectives and principles. There's a beautiful quote here in the middle that says, "The land provides a certain level of quality of life, and that's all that it can sustain." And we're starting to have these types of conversations today through new approaches like ecological forestry. And that quote there came from an elder from one of the Unama'ki communities. And I think that really sums up where we're trying to go in such a nice, concise way. Again, with this being a forestry-based initiative, it's much larger than that. The spaces and the lands that I'm going to show you today and talk about are much more than timber utilization or even utilization of goods on the ground. It's about connecting Ildu to the land and creating opportunities that might not have been there before, whether at all or whether they even aligned with their values and principles. So really, connecting communities and allowing for a space for spiritual connections is really, really important. And just having that safe space for these opportunities to come together, I think is really, you can't put any sort of value on that, and is something that we really strive to embed within our work. So just a bit of context to where the MFI came from. As many of us know, there were some major shakeups in who was managing certain lands across the province. And about 10 or 12 years ago, two big ships had left certain portions of the province. The first being Bowater Mersey in the central and western areas had left essentially large areas that were not going to be stewarded, and the province needed to work towards figuring out who would steward these lands. Same case with JDI or Irving in the western portions of the province, and really those areas being unstewarded allowed for a place for Mikmaq to come to the table and demonstrate the interest that has always been there to steward lands. And but before that, everything had already kind of been covered, but really that was a big opportunity for an initiative like the MFI to even be put on the table. The other big really occurrence that has happened in the last 10 years is the Leahy report, which I know we all have heard of and know a little bit about. But Leahy had made some really strong recommendations in there regarding Mi'kmaq being embedded and Mi'kmaq principles and perspectives being embedded in all Crown land management, but as well as having space for the initiative MFI to come to fruition. So really, those are two of the big pillars that I see through the last few years that have really kind of set the stage for this initiative to get rolling. So the result of all of this came through a pilot that was signed, a pilot land agreement, which was signed in March 2019. Now we're entering actually as of yesterday our 4th year as a pilot, and we're working right now with the Crown to extend into a more long-term agreement, which we're really positive and optimistic about, because I think that more long-term commitment is going to allow us to have more long-term and sustainable business and initiative-based investments, whether that's on the land or as, again, a business entity. So this is the first, one of the two first blocks that were encompassed in our land agreement. This is the St. Croix block, which is located just west of Highway 101 and about northwest of the Halifax region. It's 12,500 hectares, and as you can see, there's tons of forested land through there, but as well as many lakes and rivers and waterways that we've still yet to kind of reconnect to and understand the ways that maybe those waters and lands were traveled historically. From a forest management perspective, this area was previously managed by Mersey Bowater, so there are some areas that are really prime for forest management, but also have been heavily managed in the past, and some remnants of old clear cuts and whatnot. So, great opportunity, but also there's lots of restoration work to go on there. The second block being the Digby Block, just under 8,000 hectares, and is nestled kind of inland from the community of Bear River First Nation and between the Tobeatic Wilderness area. Again, many waterways as well as forested lands. This area had been previously managed by JDI, so again, heavily managed, many remnants of intensive management, but also an opportunity to really set the stage for opportunities and stands to come back and be revitalized for future generations. And as of a few months ago, we've gotten our eastern lands online. They're not formally within our agreement, to my understanding, but these will be the areas that will support and be accessed by our eastern communities. And as you can see, these ones are a little bit more piecemealed, unfortunately, but I know that the folks at UINR have done a lot of work to try and ensure that there's good access for all communities in the east. So today I want to talk a little bit about some of the operations that we've done to date. There was many conversations today about ecological forestry and some of the approaches, and to be honest, once we kind of hit the ground running with this initiative, we were really excited to see documents like the SGEM come through and have that, and for us to be able to utilize those treatments and those approaches. So over the last 2 years, we've been working quite closely with Jason Casey and the folks at Elmsdale Lumber to help us out and take our perspectives and values that communities have and demonstrate that on the ground. It has been challenging, but also rewarding in the sense that we've inherited a lot of areas that had been, again, heavily managed, but also we're very set up to do forest management. So a lot of low-hanging fruit where it was a no-brainer to go in and do a commercial thinning or a single tree selection. We were very excited last summer to take part in an irregular shelterwood trial, which was mentioned earlier, where permanent sample plots were developed, and that'll contribute towards our understanding of our forests and how that treatment will look moving forward. So that was a very exciting opportunity. Really, the way that we've looked at our thinning and selection harvest opportunities has been to utilize maturity, understanding that those stands are going to decline with age and overgrow, and which is a very basic forestry concept and perspective, but as well as to utilize the opportunity to create a multi-age class forest and to promote diversity in certain areas that had been heavily managed and even converted from hardwood to softwood stands, simply for the basis of economics. But really, what we had done last year, unfortunately, I think it's on the next slide, we've done some thinning to open up the canopy to allow some hardwoods to come up so that we could kind of restore what the natural landscape might look like. Some of our other activities have been pre-commercial thinning. We have a contractor who is an Acadia band member, and he's done over 250 hectares of PCT between only himself and maybe at times one other crew member over the last 3 years. So he's been very busy and very selective in the way that he is setting up the future forest. And lastly, the majority of our activities as far as road building have pertained to ensuring that we have good sound access. The last 2 years of operations, we've had to utilize a roadway that, before we even hit the St. Croix block, we're a good 40 minutes from pavement. So, that really cuts into our margins and even more importantly, it cuts into the ability for communities to be able to access these woodlands. So outside of our operations, we're still an entity in a business that's starting to grow, really from scratch. So in 2020, we started a project with, supported by Indigenous Services Canada and Natural Resources Canada, called the Mi'kmaq Forestry Strategic Partnership Initiative. And this project was based on trying to, take the lands of the MFI and figure out, over the next 3 years, how would we be able to obtain and sustain a sustainable business entity. So that's really where a lot of our outside of forestry, where a lot of our activities have pertained to. And to begin those that work and to develop a vision, we've been doing some community engagement to not only promote the opportunity that MFI presents for prosperity, social gatherings, simply put, the Mi'kmaq-led forestry opportunity, but as well as to gather guidance on where should this project go, what are the activities that we should be encompassing. So COVID obviously has not made that a very easy an easy task, but nonetheless, we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully, have forums like this where we can talk to our knowledge holders and communities and continue that work. And lastly, the big pieces around that of developing an entity is, Mi'kmaq have governance structures and they work collaboratively between all 13 communities. So we've really been working to weave those communities together and find a successful pathway that incorporates their understandings, their transparency, and their vision for an initiative like this. And that gets coupled in again with the business planning and ways we might be able to move forward sustainably. So some of the market opportunities we've been exploring, of course, are primary and secondary production. And that goes without saying with our harvest operations over the last few years. But there's a lot of other markets that we really want to tap into, with the underlying understanding that, the ecological matrix-based forestry is going to be a difficult task to economically face. And, with that, to promote ecological diversity, I think to uphold our economic values, we need to have economic diversity. So really, we're waiting on some legislation and some guidance to come down on, where carbon opportunities might be able to present themselves to us. But as well as, that goes tenfold with the climate crisis we're facing and the way that we need to look at our forests as a tool to solve those problems as well. Forest management services, I think, is one of the more exciting and really foundational, one of the foundational activities that we can be doing, whether that's for private woodlands or other licensees. I think there is a thirst out there for Mi'kmaq perspectives and Mi'kmaq-led forestry to be presented on land bases. And really, I think that's a bit of a niche of demonstrating how ecological forestry can be presented and serviced on the land. Non-timber forest products is another exciting one where we're looking at actual products like the chanterelle here, but as well as experiential and tourism opportunities that we'd like to have on these lands. As I mentioned earlier, there's tons of waterways. Ilnu in specifically the Bear River area have been known to be hunting and trapping guides for many generations. And that's an opportunity that the community still has an interest in. So I think that becomes very diverse and very opportunistic. And lastly, the idea of branding or a Mi'kmaq chain of custody, I think is something really strong here. We've all heard of the FSC certifications that private woodland owners or even licensees can obtain. But I think there's something to be said with, Mi'kmaq-led forestry on Mi'kmaq-managed lands, and then any products or experiences which can be of service by these lands. So, that's one of the things that I think is going to be coming down the pipe a little bit, but is very much a really big opportunity for us. So lastly, I thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've done, but in the sense of how we've been able to approach some of the challenges, specifically on the ground challenges of meeting our ecological and cultural social values. And really, through the work that myself and Jason and our operations team have done through the years, we've really been looking at this through a lens of utilizing conventional tools, but identifying that our objective and our desired outcomes are maybe different. And that's really the only differentiator between what Mi'kmaq-led forestry is trying to do versus what other mandates might be driving in the forest. Avoiding and mitigating impacts, I think, is one thing that is very foundational to ecological forestry, and how we're going to ensure that those ecological values are intact. And I say that in the sense that just leaving an overstory isn't necessarily retaining our ecological values. I have this photo here on the right. That was from 2 summers ago, and I know crowd's a little far, but you can see a little bit of gray, which is some fur and feathers, and then right over here is a little squirrel tail. And we found this stump with a local bird expert who had seen our harvest submission on the Crown Harvest Viewer. And this individual had approached us and said, hey, one of your areas you were looking to cut in is a known raptor nesting habitat. So very graciously, this individual sent us an email or gave us a call, said, I will go out and show you exactly where this is of interest instead of just, circling on a map. So myself and Jason had gone out with this individual maybe 2 hours, but we were able to avoid a whole area that was ecologically sensitive and important, well more important than whatever the timber yield would have been for that half-hectare worth of area. So that was just one area. That was just one example of how a little bit of due diligence, some great teamwork and communication with someone who was an expert in obviously raptor habitat and birding areas, was able to allow us to meet our goals. An example of mitigation comes to mind operationally with watercourse crossings, and working not only at the operational level and understanding that operators need to cross watercourses, and that's just something that none of us can avoid if we're going to meet our operations mandates. But at the same time, sometimes these values of ecological importance don't always trickle down as easily to the operational level, especially when you're talking about and trying to factor in efficiency and the economics of an operation. So, what we found is good communication and good due diligence through our planning processes to identify, where is an appropriate place to put in a water crossing. But then taking that one step further and meeting with the contractor and having them kind of give their stamp of approval to say, yes, I can put a water crossing in here, that'll work for me. So really, at the end of the day, I think communication becomes really key for us to meet some of these larger high-level policy goals. And I guess, that kind of feeds into my next point of enhancing our ecological conditions with utilization, and ensuring that our ecological goals are put at the forefront. So one of the people that I work with and has really had my position for years and years working with communities before, his name's Alton Hudson, had coined the term listening to the forest. And he had learned that through his years of working with elders and communities. And Leahy had actually used listening to the forest, if any of you know that report very well. But it can be as simple as that of identifying that an area has been managed for a certain mandate in the past, but that doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be managed that way moving forward. And I think that goes, there's many areas in many monocultures that we'll find that, you can still see the hardwoods trying to get up through those areas that, humans have tried to really convert from a natural mixed wood or hardwood stand to a bit more of a profitable softwood or studwood stand. And one of the other challenges we've been working at to address that I know many others and licensees are trying to address is archaeological and traditional use values. And forestry and archaeology, of course, can go hand in hand, but as separate practices can be very different as well, right? But if you think of archaeology on the landscape and where archaeology might exist, where is it? It's usually in the soil. We all know that the soil disturbances that can come from forestry operations, but we also know ways that these things can be mitigated. So, really, what I'm really excited about is over the next few years to look at, how we can take values like archaeology and ensure that through our practices that we're mitigating and even avoiding any type of disturbance to those values. And with that said, that's something that I think we're learning to share that knowledge and how all licensees and all woodland owners can take that into their practices, so that all of those values across the Nova Scotia landscape can be upheld. I guess from a high level, and James had mentioned it earlier about acceptable growing stock and unacceptable growing stock. I think sometimes we don't always take into consideration all of the values that our stands have, whether that's ecological, social, economic. A really great example is a softwood thicket. to most, a softwood thicket is something that needs to be remanaged, invested in. It's a bit of a pest because it's going to cost more money than what it'll return. But a softwood thicket to others might be teepee poles or wigwam poles, which can be utilized and have been utilized for generations, right? So I think it's really a change of mindset for the sector as a whole, and to look at utilization in more than maybe just the most convenient form. The way that we've kind of perceived pre-commercial thinning as well is, yes, it's an investment, it's an economic opportunity to create work, but it's also an opportunity for us to set up our forests in a positive way to be successful moving forward. Really aligning our ecological values, but in a way that doesn't necessarily impede on our economic values or our prosperity opportunities either. And that's what our contractor from Acadia First Nation has been really focusing on is, how can I leave a stand of timber that'll be able to help future generations prosper from, but allow for buds and food for the moose and the deer and the partridge to benefit today. So I think that's something that's not too far off as far as trying to balance those values and balance those opportunities. And lastly, I just want to end with saying that we found a lot of success over the last 2 years of coming together and partnering with different groups. The first being probably the province regarding our irregular shelterwood trial. That was a really big success that we felt really good with, because we were able to treat an area that didn't really fit in with any of the tools that were available to us, but it also created the opportunity for the province and for all stewards in the province to learn from one day and understand what we did in that stand is documented and can be contributing to a bigger picture, which is figuring out how can we make ecological forestry and a better balance of our values a success. And at the root of it all, I think that speaks volumes for excuse me, the MFI initiative, where these lands are very much a place of teachings and learnings, and that's at the forefront of intergenerational passing of knowledge and ensuring that we're always moving forward. So that's probably been one of the biggest take homes for me is just having the opportunity for us to grow our knowledge about the forests and be able to share that with other groups. So, Valelio, thank you. Any questions?